Hi YouTube, it's Amanda, and the purpose of this video today is to talk about all of the different ways that you can get started watching Doctor Who. Doctor Who is a British TV show. It was broadcast in the UK from about 1963, and it was done in kind of a weekly television sort of a format until roughly the late 1980s. Now, before YouTube Nerd Squad gets mad at me because I'm going to get some of my little facts wrong here, please just take a breath and be sympathetic, because Doctor Who is a huge world with a lot of interesting facts, interesting trivia, and sometimes I don't always have my trivia 100% right. So just be nice to me in the comments, please. But anyway, so 1963 is when the very first Doctor Who was broadcast, and that was the beginning. So this character here is the title character, and that is Doctor Who, or the Doctor. And this character basically travels around in a spaceship, which is, let's see, behind me, see the blue thing there? That is a police telephone box that used to be kind of popular in the UK back in the 60s. And the idea is that this is the spaceship, and that it is a chameleon, and that it can change its look to blend into its environment wherever it lands. So in the 60s, it landed in the UK, and it created this look for itself. It's a police box. Well, if you open the door and you walk in, it's actually a fully huge spaceship inside. It's bigger on the inside. And this ship can take the Doctor, the little guy on top of my ship there. This guy, William Hartnell, plays the Doctor. And he can travel in that ship to anywhere he wants to go. The other kind of cool thing about that ship is that it can go anywhere in time. So it's also a time machine. So the kind of neat thing about the show is that this character can go anywhere they want, anytime they want, and just pop up and have an adventure. So it makes for really interesting writing. You can explore all kinds of different historical events, of space-themed events, fiction-y stuff, monsters. You know, you can do all kinds of things just from the perspective of somebody who's just arriving and they get to explore this thing for the very first time. So it's really, really fun. Now, as you can imagine, since the show started in 1963 and the actor was already quite advanced in age. I mean, not quite, but, you know, was advanced in age. And now it is 2021. You know, that actor can't continue to play the role, the title role, forever. And so the show did something really cool where they came up with this neat convention where the title role, this character, the Doctor, is actually an alien from another planet and has some special abilities. And one of the abilities that this character has is to molecularly deconstruct, so basically just break completely down, and then rebuild the entire atomic molecular structure to become the same person. They're still the Doctor, but they're in an entirely new body, and maybe some of their personality has changed as well. So basically it gives the show the ability to say, okay, this is the Doctor, and this is also the Doctor, right? But the Doctor, not that one. Hello. Sorry, videos are hard. This one here, also the Doctor, but this one looks different. They're in a different body with a different personality. So it kind of enables the show to re-energize every few years with a new title actor. The closest analogy I can come is to say it's a little bit like James Bond. You just take it on fact that this person, even though they look a little different from the last person who played James Bond, is still James Bond, right? So that's kind of how the show works. Now, before you start watching the show, you kind of need to understand a little bit about the way the show is broadcast and the way that it has been broadcast, and kind of the overarching structure of the show. So it started in 1963 and it was broadcast as like a weekly television production. And so, really, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was just something that like you could turn on TV and you could watch Doctor Who if you could catch it. Um, those era of Doctor Who, I call the Old Testament of Doctor Who. A lot of fans call it classic Doctor Who because it's just sort of, it's like watching classic Star Trek and then the Next Generation, right? You know that the classic Star Trek is kind of the first generation of Star Trek where they were just sort of figuring out what they were as a show and getting their footing and stuff. The Next Generation was kind of a show that honored classic Star Trek, but just kept the story going, right? So same kind of thing with Doctor Who. You've got classic Doctor Who. 1989, I think, is when the classic era of Doctor Who kind of stopped because they took the show off of TV for a certain period of time. Between 1989 and 2005, you have a period of time when Doctor Who is not being produced as a television show and broadcast regularly on TV. However, it continued to be popular because of VHS tapes and home video technology, where it developed a little bit of a cult following so that people could continue to buy Doctor Who VHS, or they could record somebody else's episodes or record it off of PBS if it was being broadcast on public television or something like that. And so you would have this sort of mishmash of different popular stories that were passed around, but maybe not like today we can just kind of hop onto a streaming service and binge something from start to finish. Back then it wasn't you couldn't kind of do that. You just had 2 or 3 episodes here and there that you could watch. We call those the wilderness years. There was one made for TV movie that happened during the wilderness years, but it was not too successful. It was broadcast in the United States and put up against a very special episode of Roseanne. And so we Americans love our Roseanne, so it just wasn't really, it didn't take off here in the States. So it just kind of sat there in the wilderness until about 2005 when the show was brought back in a big way. The producer, Russell T Davies, created a new next gen version of the show and relaunched it, and it was published and broadcast on UK television, but it was also put to various streaming services because technology had advanced, and because we have streaming services like Netflix, a new generation of viewers was able to tap in to this phenomenon. And Netflix is how I actually accessed Doctor Who for the very first time. So all of that background being said, that was like 8 minutes of background on the show. Now we're ready to talk about the different ways that you can get started watching Doctor Who. Now, if you're a completionist like me, you might be tempted to start with 1963 and start watching from there on. However, I'm going to discourage you from doing that. And the reason for that is because the show in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were very much a product of its time period, and the way that it was filmed reflected the way that television was scripted and filmed back at that time. And if you're used to binge watching shows nowadays, like in the 2020s, you're used to a very specific type of script writing, editing, filming, and broadcast production that's really different from what it was like back then. And so you're not going to get the fast-paced scripts. You're not going to get the jump cuts. You're not going to get the big explosions and the big production. Now, all of those things exist in one form or another in the classic, but it's slow. The pace is really drawn out and really slow. So you might get a little bored and want to quit after just watching a few episodes if you start with classic. Therefore, I suggest you start with the new series. My first suggestion for an entry point for where you would start watching would be where I started, which is the very first story in the New Doctor's era in 2005, which is Christopher Eccleston playing the Doctor. By this time, we've had 8 other people who played the title role and then some. We're not going to get into the controversies of that right now, but 8 official canon people who have played the title role by this point. And then we have the 9th Doctor, played by Christopher Eccleston, that started in 2005. You'll also notice on this box set that he is with a companion here, and her name is Rose. She's played by Billie Piper. She's really good. And that's actually the title of this first episode, is titled Rose. Through this story, you don't have to have any background on the TV show of Doctor Who, because you enter the story sort of from Rose's perspective. And so Rose, when she awakes on the first day of this story, she doesn't know anything about the Doctor. She doesn't know the TARDIS. She doesn't know anything about the lore. She just knows she works in a shop and she's having a day, right? And so you get to kind of go along with her as she runs into the Doctor, and then she learns him, she learns about him, and you get to learn about him, you learn about the TARDIS, you learn about all the lore of the show along with Rose. So it works really well. I would say that you should start here and watch. There is one series or one season, we call them series, because of the way that the UK kind of format the way we talk about the show, but is essentially one season of Christopher Eccleston playing the Doctor. And then he regenerates into another actor playing the title role, David Tennant, played by David Tennant. Now, David Tennant is arguably the most popular person to portray the Doctor in the show. Now, sorry, Tom Baker fans, but I did say arguably. So if you watch through the first series from 2005 to 2006 and you like it, and then he regenerates into David Tennant, you'll probably continue to like the show. The only caveat I have about starting the show with Rose is that the show takes, the new version of the show, the New Testament, it takes itself a little while to kind of find its footing and figure out who its audience is supposed to be. So it's a family-friendly show. It's always been a family-friendly show. It's always going to be a family-friendly show, I think. But it's like, is this a show for young adults? Is this a show for teens? Is this a show for children? Is this a show for adults? You know, like, what is this? And so you do have a handful of episodes that are arguably juvenile, like maybe more so than what the overall tone of the new show really is. So you're going to have to put up with a few farting aliens and like some really juvenile stuff until the show kind of finds its way and gets its footing and figures things out, okay? So if you're somebody who's really put off by that stuff, just hang in there, because I think the show does eventually find its footing, and it kind of grades itself up to a slightly older audience factor, right? So then the second series here with David Tennant, another entry point. If you want to start watching with David Tennant, you can. The first episode is really the Christmas Invasion. It's a Christmas special, and then it goes into New Earth. I feel like this is an okay place to start, but probably my least favorite of all of the ways I'm going to talk to you about, because David Tennant relationship with this companion, with Rose Tyler, is really a continuation of the relationship that she had with the 9th version of the Doctor. And so when you kind of start to get into some of the relationshipy stuff, I think you're really missing out if you don't have that first season's worth of stories there as a sort of background to that story. So I would say maybe don't skip 9, like maybe go back and get 9. When I talk in numbers like that, I'm talking 9 is the 9th Doctor. But don't skip 9. Go back and start with the episode Rose, and it's only one season, and then you're going to get into David Tennant, who played the Doctor for 3 or 4 seasons. Okay. So that's the next entryway. After that, it's kind of like every new Doctor, new incarnation of the Doctor, you have a pretty good entry point at the beginning of their series. I think that the BBC sort of figured out after a while that whenever they change over Doctors, it's a good idea to sort of change over companions and give a story where you can really, the audience can kind of learn about the Doctor along with the new companions. There's one place that doesn't work, and I'll tell you in a second. So the 11th Doctor starts with series 5, and that's the Matt Smith portrayal of the Doctor. The 5th series is a good place to start. Once again, because you have a new companion, Amy Pond, and it's just like with Rose, you sort of learn about the Doctor as you're experiencing it along with her, that story. You again have some elements of juvenile sort of humor, but I think it's more balanced this time. And I feel like the new showrunner at this time, which is Stephen Moffat, he has a really good handle on making long story arcs that extend over multiple seasons and laying out breadcrumbs along the way to keep the audience hooked. So it really has that binge factor where you just want to keep watching because you want to find out what happens. The next Doctor Who is Peter Capaldi, and he makes his entrance in the story Deep Breath. I would actually not recommend entering here, and I'll tell you why. I think if you want to enter at a Peter Capaldi, the 12th Doctor, I think if you want to enter with a 12 story, I think the best story to do that with is actually Series 10, Part 1, which is when he gets a new companion named Bill, played by Pearl Mackie. And again, for all the reasons I sort of said before, I think that it works better if you're going to start the show for the first time to enter the show with a new companion because you're learning about the Doctor and all of the lore along with the new companion. When 12 makes his appearance, he's got Clara here, and Clara was actually a companion for a long time with the previous Doctor, so they sort of skip over re-explaining all of the TARDIS and the time travel and all of that stuff because there's no point. Clara already knows all that stuff. So I would say if you're going to start with 12, start with the Pearl Mackie stuff in Series 10, Part 1. And then you could, of course, start with the new series, which is the new Doctor, which is the 13th Doctor in the 11th series. Now, you might notice that this Doctor is actually played by a woman, which is pretty cool, I think. They did start this series over with a brand new production team, a new orchestra arranger, I'm sorry, I just butchered that. A new companions, a whole new feel to the show. It is a very new type of a feel to the show from what we had seen in Doctors 9 through 12 when we start with 13. And again, it takes a little while for it to kind of gain its foot. But I do think that it is a really modern show that will really appeal to younger 20-somethings and even maybe teens because of the style of how they shoot the show and the production value. To me, it didn't feel like Doctor Who until a couple of seasons in, not until we really started getting those classic monsters, the Daleks and everything. But once it started feeling like Doctor Who to me, then it was really like, okay, I'm full in. I really love this. So I think this is a good entry point, especially if you're a little bit on the younger side. The only thing with starting here is that there's only a handful of series out so far with Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, so you're going to run out of stuff pretty quick. You'll have to go back anyway. As far as that goes, that's kind of new series entry points. There's really only one other place that I have heard a lot recommended for people to enter the series in the New Testament, and that's with a single one-off episode of the David Tennant Series 3, Part 2, and it is called Blink. And it's kind of in the middle of Series 3, and it is a episode that has David Tennant as the Doctor, Martha Jones is the name of the companion, and they're actually not in it very much. It's an episode that's meant to be just kind of a spooky, it's almost to me like a Halloween-ish episode, and it's really focuses on this lady named Sally Sparrow and this particular monster that's called the Weeping Angels. And you can actually see, I'm sorry about the glare, but you can actually see the Weeping Angel on this picture here. It's like a gargoyle type angel statue that is stone while you're looking at it, but when you look away, it like moves. It's freaky. So it's a good episode, and you don't really have to know a lot about Doctor Who to enjoy the episode. I've actually watched this episode with people who don't know Doctor Who, and they enjoyed it. So a lot of people will say, watch that episode, and if you love it, then go back and start at one of the other entry points. I mean, I'm okay with that. I don't know if that's the best way to watch the show. I do like the one-off episode, but I also think it helps to have a little bit of background. So let me know if you feel like that's your favorite way. Like if you're one of those people that thinks that that's a good way. What are the benefits to doing that? Because to me, it's just as good to do it the other ways. Okay, that all said, let me do classic really fast. There's, in my mind, a couple of ways to do classic. The first way is to start at the beginning and go all the way through in broadcast order, which is how I like to watch the show now that I've kind of watched all of the show a couple of 2-3 dozen times. I kind of like to watch it as it was broadcast. So I think that's a good way to watch it. The only thing with that is, like I said earlier, you're going to have to make sure that you're really patient because it takes a long time to binge that show that way. I mean, it's going to be a year before you get through it. And honestly, the pace is very different. So you have to have an appreciation for how television was produced at the time of the episode you're watching. So if it's early, 60s, into the 70s, then it might be black and white. The production quality might not be very good. You might see equipment in the background. Sets might be a little bit funky, And then it's kind of fun, actually, in my mind, to watch it that way because you learn a lot about television and, they do some kind of cool experimental stuff. As they switch to color in the 70s, and then you get the third Doctor, it's right around the time that James Bond was really taking off in popularity. And so they did a lot of James Bondy type stuff. They had car chases and helicopters, and, you get the little Sea-Doo on the water, and, all kinds of kind of cool stunts and things start to come in. So you start to see more of that sort of thing. And then really after they kind of get into the fourth Doctor era in the late 70s, you really see some wacky experimental stuff. And I will argue that that's what sort of added to the show's cult status, is that a lot of people would like to kind of sit around and, party and watch an episode of Doctor Who sort of ironically and laugh at it. If you're going to do classic, you can either do it that way or you can kind of skip around and pick and choose episodes. That's the way that I first started watching classic. Was I was like, oh, I want to watch a fourth Doctor, I would like to watch a sixth Doctor, and you can just kind of pick and choose. You might look at YouTube to get some recommendations for good stories for those Doctors. The fourth Doctor is always a good one to start with just because he was the most popular of the classic Doctors. Sorry, people who love the other Doctors, but he was. And so he had the longest run of the classic Doctors and more stories, arguably, than anybody else in classic. We could argue that. But anyway, he had some good stories. This is a good one, I think, if you're going to just watch a Tom Baker story just to get a feel for Tom Baker. It's called Genesis of the Daleks, and there's some really interesting story stuff in here that I think is good. And he has neat companions in this one, so kind of fun. And the most iconic monster in all of Doctor Who, the Dalek. And, of course, this story is all about the Daleks. So that's kind of it. Those are the entry points into Doctor Who. In order to start watching, you probably are not like me and you don't just have these DVDs sitting around. So you're going to have to find a streaming service to watch it on. I am hesitant to really endorse streaming services or talk about them even because they change so much. Especially Doctor Who seems to be one of those shows that bounces around from service to service all the time. But I will say at this moment in time, as I'm recording, I believe you can watch all of the classic Doctor Who's that are available on the service BritBox. So if you want to watch classic or Old Testament Doctor Who, you can go to BritBox to watch those. And then as of now, I think the new series is almost all of it is on HBO Max. So if you go to HBO Max, you can watch them there. And then the very most recent, which was like a New Year's Day special, is on AMC Plus. And I don't know when that will be moved over to HBO Max. It's very confusing. And then you can also get, if you just want to watch it digitally, you can also purchase them digitally on Amazon Video. So that's kind of how I watch it, is season to season. I purchase it on Amazon Video, and then I get to watch it the next day after it's broadcast because I don't have BBC America because I'm poor and I don't have cable. So I just buy the season on Amazon and I watch it the day after it's broadcast. And then I buy the DVD because I don't want to have to be stuck with subscribing to various services. So that's my take on watching Doctor Who. 25 minutes of watching that. If you could get through me talking about how to watch a Doctor Who, you can certainly handle watching one. So pick your favorite entry point and go watch. Let me know down in the comments what's your favorite entry point for this show. Bye-bye.